Hello and welcome to this video about fossil fuels. We're going to look at petroleum, natural gas, and coal. What are the sources and uses of fossil fuels, and what is the cost of fossil fuels? Remember, energy cannot be created or destroyed. Energy can only be transformed from one form into another. Some forms of energy are useful and some forms are not. Here's just a little photograph showing examples of different processes that require energy resources. Automobiles, for example, they use energy from the burning of gasoline. And the gasoline is a form there's a form of energy stored in the chemical potential energy of the bonds of that gasoline that is useful, but the energy that it is transformed into, the thermal energy that heats the air around it, that is no longer a useful energy form. See if you can identify some of the other processes in this photo that require energy resources. So in the year 2009, more energy was used annually in the United States than in any other country in the world. We are a very large consumer of useful energy resources. Here is just a chart showing that in the United States in the year 2008, where some of those energy sources came from. The vast majority was from petroleum, natural gas, and coal. And here we have a chart just showing how that energy was used. Residential, industrial, commercial, and transportation, fairly even split amongst those. It would be very interesting for advanced proficiency to look and see how has this changed since 2009 or 2008. In the last half a decade, has this changed significantly or not? So what do we mean when we talk about fossil fuels? Coal, natural gas, petroleum, crude oil are called fossil fuels. And the reason they're called that is because they form from the remains of ancient plants and animals that were buried and altered over millions of years. And that's why they are called fossil fuels. The combustion of fossil fuels produces carbon dioxide and water. That process converts the chemical potential energy that's stored in the bonds between atoms into thermal energy and light. Compared to wood, the energy stored in fossil fuels is much more concentrated, and you can see that on this chart right here. We have natural gas, petroleum, and coal. Compared to wood, the energy content per gram in joules is significantly more in fossil fuels than in wood. So let's take a look at some of these individual types of fossil fuels. Petroleum. Petroleum is liquid fossil fuel. It's very flammable. It's a mixture of thousands of different chemical compounds. Most of the compounds are hydrocarbons, means that their molecules are made out of different arrangements of carbon and hydrogen atoms. These hydrocarbon compounds can be separated by fractional distillation. If you'll remember, distillation is a technique that can be used to separate mixtures based on their boiling points. And a fractional distillation would be the same idea, just set up for a variety of different boiling points. And so these hydrocarbons each have different boiling points, and they can be separated by distilling them out at their respective boiling point. You might be surprised to know all of the different kinds of petroleum products. If you just look around you, probably have a lot of them in your classroom right now. Fuel, obviously, but plastics, synthetic fabrics, cosmetics, medicines, grease, motor oil, asphalt, even wax-based products are all petroleum products. Natural gas is simply a fossil fuel composed mostly of gas, mostly methane gas, actually. It has a little bit of propane and butane in it as well. It contains more chemical potential energy per kilogram than either petroleum or coal. It also happens to burn cleaner than other fossil fuels and produces fewer pollutants. Coal is a solid fossil fuel, and it can be mined, found in different mines, And at this point, right now, about 2/3 of the energy that we use comes from petroleum and natural gas, and only about 1/4 comes from coal in the United States. Coal is a mixture of hydrocarbons and other chemical impurities. It happens to be the most abundant fossil fuel in the world. It's expected that if we, as a world population, continue our current rate of consumption of coal, it would last between 200 and 250 years. In the United States, almost 70% of the electrical energy that we use is produced by burning fossil fuels like coal, natural gas, and petroleum. The overall efficiency of fossil fuel burning power of a fossil fuel burning power plant is about 35%. That's because in a power plant, not all of the chemical potential energy stored in the fuel is converted into electrical energy. Some of it's converted into thermal energy, and that's simply wasted. Only 35% is actually used to be able to provide electricity. So what are the costs of fossil fuels? They're certainly not free. There are downfalls and negative aspects to them. The combustion of fossil fuels releases carbon dioxide, which has a big impact on our environment. Combustion of fossil fuels also releases other pollutants. And fossil fuels are non-renewable resources. What do we mean when we use that term? The definition of a non-renewable resource are those that cannot be replaced by natural processes as quickly as they are used. Are you looking for some advanced ideas? Electricity has been a major source of power in the U.S. for less than 100 years. Research the early history of electricity use in the U.S. Also, in 1973, an oil embargo by the Middle East caused an energy crisis in the U.S. that forced people to carefully examine their dependence on foreign oil. Research this topic and related major events since that time. Also, more than 65% of the world's oil reserves are in the Middle East. Research some of the changes that have occurred in these countries since oil was discovered in them. Maybe you have some other questions or ideas relating to any of these topics. Please feel free to research those, and I look forward to seeing what you come up with, and we'll see you in class.